At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. After all, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Larissa. Let's begin. Is that the human medic? Sahik said as he stared at the smiling individual coming toward them across the testing room. The human was not all that different from Sahik's himself in basic bipedal form, but while Sahik's fit what a human might call the stereotype of a gray alien, this one was broader, more muscular, and far more expressive. He was already smiling as he approached at an unhurried pace, stopping to offer a handshake to everyone in his path. "I think it is," replied Zanib, an Anvian covered in blue and yellow feathers, his long back flowing into an equally long neck. "Look at the info screen. It's already flagging him as our squad mate for the next training exercise." "At least he's not a soldier," said Fulin, a black-furred carnivore with sharp features, a narrow snout, a long tail, and clawed digits. He was the only one among the three of them who had fought alongside humans before in the Galactic Council's mixed species army. "Trust me," Fulin added, "none of you want to be paired with a human soldier. They're unruly and borderline insane with their grenades and chemically propelled weapons." The human medic finished his conversation with a technician near the equipment lockers, clasping the startled alien's appendage with both hands and pumping it enthusiastically while saying something that made the technician's translator emit an uncomfortable chirping sound. Finally released, the technician scurried away, and the human turned his attention fully toward their group. His stride was confident, almost casual, as if he were walking into a social gathering rather than a combat simulation facility. The smile never left his face, reaching his eyes in a way that Sahik found both disarming and slightly unnerving. Humans had such mobile features, so many muscles dedicated to expression alone, that it was sometimes difficult to read their true intentions. "Hey there!" the human called out when he was still several paces away, his voice booming across the testing room with an energy that made several nearby species glance in their direction. "I'm Liam Strong, combat medic, human contingent, third wave integration." He extended his hand first to Sahik's, who hesitantly reached out his own slender three-fingered hand. The human's grip was warm, firm but not crushing, and mercifully brief. "You must be Sahik's, right? Centaurian?" "Yes," Sahik managed, his translator rendering his native language into something the human could understand. "That is correct." Liam moved on to Fulin next, shaking his clawed hand with the same enthusiasm. "Fulin! Great to meet you, man! I've heard your people are absolute units in close combat." Then to Zanib, carefully adjusting his approach to accommodate the Anvian's longer neck and different posture. "And Zanib, our eye in the sky, right? This is going to be awesome." He turned to face the large display screen mounted on the wall, where 4 names were now listed in glowing text, each accompanied by species designation and role assignment. "Looks like we're Squad 7 for this exercise," Liam said, his hands going to his hips as he studied the information. "First time this particular combination of species has been attempted, according to the briefing I got. Pretty cool to be making history, even if it's just training history." Sahik, Fulin, and Zanib exchanged a look, a moment of silent communication that transcended the difficulty of their vastly different physiologies and communication methods. Though they had only met an hour before this exercise, though their species had evolved on worlds separated by hundreds of light years, though their methods of conveying emotion ranged from Sahik's skin tone shifts to Fulin's ear positions to Zanib's feather arrangements, they all understood the same unspoken thought. This was not going to go well. The Interspecies Combat Effectiveness Program, universally known by its unfortunate acronym ICEP, had been established 3 cycles ago by the Galactic Council's Military Oversight Committee. The stated purpose was noble enough and had been repeated in enough official communications that even Sahik, who generally avoided military politics, could recite it from memory. The program existed to help different species understand each other's capabilities, to identify which combinations of species might form the most effective combat units, to allow each species to demonstrate their particular strengths in controlled environments, and to foster the kind of camaraderie and trust that would be essential in actual combat situations where lives were at stake. The reality, of course, was considerably less inspiring. ICEP had quickly become a bureaucratic showcase, a way for various military committees to demonstrate that they were doing something productive with their substantial budgets while avoiding any actual controversial decisions about force composition or deployment strategies. Every few weeks, another round of testing would be announced, new combinations of species would be thrown together, and detailed reports would be filed documenting the results. These reports inevitably concluded that the established pairings, the ones that had been developed through actual combat experience rather than computer modeling, remained the most effective options available. Sahix had participated in 3 previous ICEP exercises, and none of those exercises had included a human. Humans were still relatively new to the Galactic Council, having achieved FTL capability only 15 standard cycles ago. Fulin's warnings about human soldiers were widely shared across the military, usually accompanied by war stories about humans doing things that range from tactically questionable to outright suicidal. But this wasn't a human soldier. This was a medic. How dangerous could a medic be? The display screen flickered, then changed, showing 4 separate chamber assignments. A synthesized voice, carefully neutral to avoid favoring any particular species' audio preferences, announced, "Squad 7, please proceed to your designated immersion chambers. The exercise will begin in 10 standard minutes. Remember that all injuries sustained during the simulation are not real, though your pain receptors will register them as such. Medical override protocols are in place for any participants who need to exit early." "All right, team." Liam clapped his hands together, the sound sharp in the suddenly quiet room. "This is going to be great. I've been looking forward to working with you all. Remember, in there, we've got each other's backs. Communication, coordination, and keeping everyone alive. That's how we win this thing." Sahix felt his skin shift toward a pale blue, an involuntary response that indicated uncertainty in his species. "Yes, of course," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We will, do our best." "That's the spirit!" Liam flashed another one of those impossibly broad grins and headed toward his assigned chamber with the same unhurried confidence he had shown throughout their brief interaction. Sahix moved toward his own chamber, his elongated legs carrying him in a smooth glide that his species had evolved to navigate the low-gravity environment of their homeworld. He tried not to think too much about the fact that he would be spending the next several hours in a combat simulation with a human on his team. Medic or not, humans were humans, and if even half the stories were true, this was going to be an interesting experience at the very least. The immersion chamber was a sleek pod of polished metal and transparent polymers, its interior fitted with a contoured seat designed to accommodate a wide range of body types. Sahix stepped inside, and the door sealed behind him. Immediately, the chamber's display screens came alive, filling his vision with information about the upcoming simulation. Infantry combat scenario, ground-based engagement, trenches and obstacles enabled, drones and high-tech equipment disabled. The setting was meant to simulate combat conditions on one of the outer rim planets, the kind of place where the Galactic Council maintained a presence, but where the infrastructure was minimal and the technology limited. It was the kind of environment where basic skills mattered more than fancy equipment, where a soldier's ability to think and adapt was more valuable than the latest weapon systems. The screens showed their assigned roles, and Sahix studied them carefully. Liam Strong, medic. Zanib, scout and reconnaissance. Fulin, assault and damage. Sahix, assault and damage. The scoring system was laid out beneath each name, and Sahix noted immediately that their individual conditions for success were vastly different from one another. For himself and Fulin, the scoring was straightforward. Points for enemy targets neutralized, points for tactical objectives secured, points for survival. Their penalties for dying in the simulation were relatively modest, a temporary setback that would cost them some points but wouldn't devastate their overall score. It was a system designed to encourage aggressive action, to reward soldiers who took calculated risks in pursuit of the mission. Zanib's scoring was different, focused on reconnaissance objectives completed, tactical information provided to the team, and survival. The Anvian would be rewarded for staying alive and keeping the team informed. not for direct combat engagement. But Liam's scoring system was something else entirely. The human medic would receive points for keeping his teammates alive, with massive bonuses for successful field treatment of injuries. And his penalties for allowing a teammate to die were enormous, easily 10 times the penalty that Sahix or Fulin would suffer for their own deaths. Sahix felt his skin shift toward a lighter shade, almost silver, which in his species indicated pleasant surprise. The settings were quite interesting indeed. He settled into the chamber's seat, adjusting his position until the contours properly supported his body. The neural helmet descended from above, a crown of sensors and interface points that would connect directly with his nervous system. Sahix had done this enough times that the process no longer made him nervous. He relaxed, opened his mind to the connection, and felt the helmet's sensors find and link with his neural pathways. Reality dissolved. For a moment, there was nothing, a void of sensation that lasted only a fraction of a second but felt like an eternity. Then, the simulation crashed into existence around him, so sudden and complete that his mind accepted it as real before his conscious thoughts could catch up. They were in a battlefield. Explosions thundered around them, close enough that Sahix felt the pressure waves against his skin. The sky above was a strange orange, and the landscape was nothing but churned mud and shattered trees. They stood in what could generously be called a foxhole, really just a depression in the ground that offered minimal cover. Wooden crates were stacked haphazardly around them, marked with symbols indicating they contained power cells for energy rifles. Sahix looked down at himself. He was equipped with light armor, plates of composite material that covered his vital areas without restricting his movement. An energy rifle was slung across his back, and a smaller sidearm was holstered at his hip. Various pouches and packs hung from his belt, containing ammunition, medical supplies, and field rations. Fulin stood to his left, similarly equipped but with heavier armor that accommodated his larger frame. His rifle was a different model, optimized for his species' greater physical strength. His tail lashed back and forth, a sign of agitation. Zanib was perched on the edge of the foxhole, his wings folded tight against his body. He wore minimal armor, just enough to protect vital organs without adding too much weight. His equipment was focused on reconnaissance, optical enhancers, signal boosters, compact recording devices. And Liam, the human medic, stood in the center of their position, looking almost absurdly calm given the chaos around them. He wore armor similar to Sahix's, but his equipment was markedly different. Instead of ammunition pouches, he carried medical kits. Instead of extra weapons, he had what appeared to be a portable scanner and treatment unit. He did carry a sidearm and a rifle, but they seemed almost like afterthoughts, secondary to his primary role. "All right, team." Liam's voice cut through the noise of the battlefield, steady and confident. "We need to secure this area and push forward to the objective marker. Zanib, can you get airborne and give us a view of what we're dealing with?" "The most efficient approach would be to advance quickly," Fulin said, his translator rendering his growls and barks into clipped, aggressive sentences. "Overwhelming force, minimal caution. We take ground before the enemy can establish proper positions." "I could scout ahead," Zanib offered, his neck swaying slightly as he peered over the edge of their cover. "Identify threats, find a safe route. Or we could take a more careful approach," Liam suggested, his tone diplomatic. "Make sure we don't walk into anything we can't handle. Keep the team together, watch each other's backs." Sahix noticed Fulin's ears flatten a bit, a gesture of dismissal. "This is a combat simulation, medic, not a medical training exercise. We score points by engaging the enemy, not by hiding." "Zanib, scout ahead," Fulin continued, essentially ignoring Liam's input entirely. "Sahix and I will advance behind your reconnaissance. Find us a position where we can engage." Zanib's feathers ruffled a little, but he nodded. "Agreed. I'll report what I find." With a powerful thrust of his legs and a snap of his wings, the Anvian launched himself into the air. Sahix felt a momentary pang of uncertainty. Perhaps they should have listened to the human's suggestion, but Fulin had combat experience, and his approach made tactical sense. They were here to fight, after all. That was how the simulation was scored. He pulled himself up to the edge of the foxhole, keeping low, and peered over the rim of churned earth. Immediately, energy bolts screamed past his head, so close he could feel the heat of their passage. He dropped back down, his heart's racing. Even though he knew intellectually that he couldn't actually die here, that any injuries would be purely simulated, the primitive parts of his brain didn't care about that distinction. The fear was real, the adrenaline was real, and the survival instinct was very, very real. "Contact ahead!" Zanib's voice came through their communication system, transmitted directly into their neural implants. "I see a clear path along the right flank. There's an elevated position about half a mile from here, good sight lines, defensible. The approach is rough terrain, lots of mud, and there's an open field we'll need to cross near the end, but it's our best option." "How open?" Foulin asked, already checking his rifle. "Maybe 50 meters of exposure, but I don't see any enemy positions that have a direct line of sight to it." "Maybe we should reconsider," Liam said from behind them, his voice calm but insistent. "Half a mile through rough terrain, then an open field crossing. That's a lot of vulnerability. If they have any forces mobile enough to reposition..." "Keep your opinions to yourself unless someone gets hurt, medic." Foulin cut him off abruptly. "This is a combat operation. We need to establish offensive positions, not debate every tactical decision." Sahix heard Liam sigh, a very human sound of resignation. "Understood. I'll follow your lead." Foulin glanced at Sahix, and Sahix nodded. They were in agreement. Cautious advancement wouldn't win them this simulation. They needed to be bold, aggressive, to seize the initiative before the enemy could consolidate their positions. "Moving," Foulin announced, and he hauled himself over the edge of the foxhole. Sahix followed, his rifle ready, his eyes scanning for threats. The terrain was even worse than it had looked from their starting position. The mud was thick and clinging, sucking at his feet with every step. Broken equipment and shattered trees created obstacles that had to be navigated around or climbed over. The smoke was thick enough that visibility was limited to perhaps 20 meters in most directions. Behind them, Sahix could hear the human medic following, moving with surprising quietness for someone his size. Liam didn't complain, didn't offer any more unwanted tactical advice, just kept pace with them as they advanced through the miserable landscape. Above, Zanib wheeled and circled, occasionally dropping lower to get a better view of something before climbing back to a safer altitude. His reports came in steady intervals, guiding them around concentrations of enemy forces, warning them about obstacles ahead. The half-mile took nearly 20 minutes to traverse. Every step was exhausting, every moment filled with the anticipation of enemy contact. Through it all, Liam stayed close, never complaining, never falling behind, despite carrying equipment that looked just as heavy as their combat gear. Finally, they reached the edge of the open field Zanib had mentioned. It was a stretch of relatively level ground, the mud less deep, the obstacles fewer. 50 meters to cross, and they would reach the elevated position that would give them the tactical advantage they needed. "Zanib," Foulin said, his voice low and controlled. "We're at the crossing point. Give it another sweep. Make sure we're clear." "Affirmative." They waited, crouched behind the remains of what might have once been a wall, while the Amvians circled above the field. Sahix found himself holding his breath, his finger resting on his rifle's trigger guard. The open ground looked peaceful, almost inviting compared to the hell they had just navigated. But open ground was dangerous. They all knew that. You could be exposed, vulnerable, easy targets. "I see. Wait." Zanib's voice suddenly hinted an edge of panic. "Wait, there are forces moving up on both flanks. It's an ambush. The field is a kill zone. Retreat. Retreat now." Sahix felt his blood go cold. They had walked right into it, and now... An explosion lit up the sky, and Zanib's scream tore through their communication system. The Anvian plummeted from the sky, his wings tangled and burning, feathers trailing smoke. He hit the center of the field with a sickening thud, his body limp, flames spreading across his plumage. "Cover!" Foulin shouted, and both he and Sahix threw themselves behind a fallen tree, pressing themselves into the mud as energy bolts began to rain down around them. Sahix's mind raced. Without Zanib's aerial reconnaissance, they were blind. Without his mobility, they couldn't scout ahead, and returning to their starting point through the terrain they had just crossed. Now, with enemies alerted to their presence and probably moving to cut off their retreat, seemed impossible. They were pinned down, outmaneuvered, and about to experience their first deaths in this simulation less than 30 minutes in. This was a disaster. "I'm going after him!" Liam's voice cut through Sahix's spiral of panic. "What?" Fulin's head snapped around. "Zanib, I'm going to get him!" The human medic was already moving, checking his medical kit, his eyes locked on the burning figure in the middle of the field. "Are you insane?" Sahix found his voice. "That's open ground. During an ambush, you'll be killed instantly." "I need you two to provide covering fire," Liam said, and his voice was completely calm, as if he were discussing something routine instead of proposing to run into a kill zone. "Suppressing fire doesn't need to be accurate. Just keep their heads down. Can you do that?" "The system will destroy your score," Fulin protested. "You'll lose massive points for dying." But Liam was already moving, not waiting for their agreement, simply assuming they would do what needed to be done. He vaulted over the fallen tree and sprinted toward Zanib's position with a speed that shocked both of them. "Ancestors preserve us," Fulin muttered. And then he was up, his rifle barking as he laid down fire toward the enemy positions. Sahix joined him half a second later, his own rifle adding to the suppressing fire. He wasn't aiming at anything specific, couldn't see any clear targets through the smoke and chaos, just firing in the general direction the enemy bolts seemed to be coming from. The strategy was simple. Make the enemy duck, make them think twice about exposing themselves, buy the crazy human a few precious seconds. Liam ran like his life depended on it, his boots pounding across the muddy ground. Energy bolts screamed past him, close enough that Sahix could see them illuminate the human's armor. One bolt came so close it grazed Liam's head, burning away a patch of his hair and leaving a scorch mark on his helmet. But the medic didn't slow down, didn't even flinch. He reached Zanib and dropped to his knees, his hands already moving. He rolled the Anvian onto his back, his medical scanner out and running, his eyes assessing the damage even as more enemy fire tore up the ground around them. "He's alive!" Liam's shout came through their comms. "Covering fire now! I'm bringing him out!" Sahix watched in disbelief as the human medic scooped Zanib's body into his arms. The Anvian wasn't particularly heavy by most species' standards, but he wasn't light either, and carrying another person while running through an active combat zone should have been impossible. Yet Liam did it, turning and sprinting back toward their position with the wounded scout cradled against his chest. "Run!" Liam was screaming, his voice raw. "Everyone back to the spawn point! Move, move, move!" Fulin and Sahix didn't need to be told twice. They broke from their cover and ran, their legs pumping, their equipment rattling with every step. Behind them, the human medic followed, somehow, impossibly, keeping pace with them despite his burden. The journey back was a nightmare. The terrain that had been difficult to cross carefully was nearly impossible to navigate at a full run. They slipped in the mud, tripped over debris, stumbled through craters. And all the while, the enemy was closing in around them. Sahix realized with growing horror that they had been completely surrounded. The forces on both flanks had moved in behind them while they were focused on crossing the field, and now they were caught in a collapsing pocket, being herded back toward their starting point with hostiles on all sides. They were going to die, all of them. This simulation was about to turn into a complete failure, and there was nothing they could. An explosion detonated to Sahix's left, close enough that the pressure wave picked him up and threw him several meters. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurring. Something hot and sharp tore through his shoulder, and he screamed as simulated pain receptors faithfully reproduced what being hit with shrapnel would feel like. "Sahix!" Fulin's voice, distant and distorted. Sahix managed to get his eyes open. Fulin was a dozen meters ahead, limping badly, a section of his tail missing and one leg dragging. Blood matted his fur, and his movements were jerky, uncoordinated. In front of them both, impossibly, the human was still running. Zanib was still cradled in his arms, the Anvian's breathing labored but steady. How was Liam moving faster than either of them while carrying a wounded teammate? Please. Zanib's voice came through the comms, weak and pain-filled. Please, just let me die. Let me respawn. I can come back, help the team. Please. Liam didn't respond, didn't waste breath on words, just kept running. Sahix tried to get to his feet, and that's when he realized he couldn't see out of his right eye. He reached up with a shaking hand and felt the burned mess that the simulation had made of the right side of his face. A plasma bolt had caught him, melted through his helmet, destroyed his eye, and carved a channel through his neck that was pumping blood down his armor. He was dying, maybe not immediately, but soon. The simulation's damage model was sophisticated enough to account for blood loss, shock, secondary organ failure. He had minutes at best. The two of them returned to the foxhole, half falling into it, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The human had arrived first, and he had brought Zanib, somehow not dead despite having run through a combat zone with a wounded soldier in his arms. The human medic laid Zanib down on the driest patch of ground available and immediately started working on him, his medical equipment emerging from pouches and packs. "You're going to be fine," Liam was saying, his voice steady and reassuring despite the chaos around them. "I've got you. You're not dying today. Just hold on, Zanib. Hold on." Zanib was still begging to be allowed to die, to respawn, to be useful again. But Liam wasn't listening, his focus absolute as he worked to stabilize the Anvian's condition. Sahix and Fulin exchanged a look, and in that moment, they understood something important. The human was going to try to save them, too, and being saved was going to ruin their scores completely. They would get almost no points for damage dealt, no points for objectives secured, nothing but the minimal survival points. Meanwhile, the penalties for dying and respawning were relatively small. The smart move, the tactically sound decision, was to die now and come back fresh and ready to contribute to the mission. "We should..." Fulin started, his voice weak. "Yeah," Sahix agreed. They both started moving toward the edge of the foxhole slowly, trying to be subtle about it. If they could just get outside, just expose themselves to enemy fire for a few seconds, they could die quickly and get back into the fight. "Hey!" Liam's head snapped around, and his eyes locked onto them with an intensity that stopped both of them in their tracks. "Where do you think you're going?" Sahix fumbled for an explanation. "We need to establish a perimeter?" "You need to sit down before you bleed out," Liam said, and there was steel in his voice now, the kind of authority that didn't invite argument. "Both of you, sit, now." "But the mission..." "The mission can wait 5 minutes while I keep my team alive. Sit, down." Somehow they found themselves obeying, sitting down next to Zanib, who was already looking somewhat better. The burns on his feathers had been treated with some kind of foam that was hardening into a protective coating, and the medical scanner showed his vital signs stabilizing. Liam moved to Sahix first, his hands already reaching for medical supplies. "That neck wound first, then we'll see about the eye." "Liam, please, you don't understand." Sahix tried. "The scoring system..." "I understand perfectly." Liam cut him off, his hands already working, cleaning the wound, applying coagulants, sealing damaged blood vessels. "You think dying and respawning is the smart play? Get back in the fight fresh. Minimize your downtime, maximize your combat effectiveness, right?" "Well, yes." "No." Liam's voice was firm. "No one dies on my watch. I don't care about the scoring system. I don't care about the simulation parameters. I'm a medic, and medics keep people alive. That's the job. That's the only job that matters." He moved to Fulin next, and the carnivore tried to protest, tried to explain that his leg was too damaged, that it would be faster to respawn, but Liam ignored him with the same absolute determination. "Please," Fulin actually begged, his ears flat against his skull. "Please, just let me die. This is going to ruin our scores, all of our scores." "Don't care," Liam said cheerfully, his hands working on the mangled leg with surprising gentleness. "You're all staying alive even if it kills me." Outside their foxhole, the sounds of combat were growing closer. The enemy forces had tracked them back to their starting point and were clearly preparing to overrun their position. They could hear the mechanical sounds of advancing troops, the whine of charging energy weapons, the ominous click of grenades being primed. "They're coming," Zanib said weakly, his head raised just enough to peer over the edge of their cover. "A lot of them." "Then I guess I'll have to deal with them," Liam said, and he actually sounded cheerful about it. He finished sealing Fulin's leg, checked Sahix's neck wound one more time, and then stood up, checking his rifle. "You?" Sahix couldn't help but ask. "You're going to deal with them?" "Well, I can't very well let them kill you guys after I just spent 10 minutes keeping you alive, can I?" Liam grinned, and there was something slightly unhinged about that expression now. Something that reminded Sahix of the stories about human soldiers. "Don't worry, I've got this. You three just stay here and keep recovering." And with that, the human medic climbed out of the foxhole and walked into hell. The first enemy soldier that appeared over the ridge of their position took a rifle bolt directly to the chest, Liam's shot so fast and accurate that the hostile didn't even have time to raise their weapon. The second and third enemies met similar fates, Liam's movements economical and precise as he worked his rifle. "Is he—" Fulin started. "I think he's actually going to—" Sahix couldn't finish the sentence. "We're not going to die today, are we?" Zanib said weakly. "No," Sahix replied, watching as Liam threw something that looked suspiciously like a grenade into a cluster of advancing enemies. "No, I don't think we are." The explosion was considerable. Liam fought with a ferocity that none of them had anticipated. He used everything at his disposal. Grenades, plasma weapons, energy rifles, even one of their own weapons that he grabbed from the supply crates. When a group of enemies tried to flank them from the right, he produced a flamethrower from somewhere, absolutely not standard medic equipment, and turned them back in a wall of fire. And in between all of this, he would drop back into the foxhole, check on them, make sure their wounds were still stable, and then head back out to continue holding their position. "How is he doing this?" Fulin asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "I don't know," Sahix admitted. "I thought he was a medic." "He is a medic," Zanib said, his neck craning to watch the human work. "Look at his equipment. All of it is medical. Even the weapons are technically listed as defensive armaments for medical personnel." "Defensive?" Fulin's laugh was slightly hysterical. "He just threw 3 grenades in a row and then used suppressing fire to drive back an entire squad." "Defending us," Zanib pointed out. "We're his patients. He's keeping us safe." Another explosion rocked the battlefield, and they watched as Liam emerged from the smoke, his armor scorched, his face covered in mud and blood, probably not his own, still moving with that same determined energy. "How are we doing in here?" Liam called down, his voice somehow still cheerful. "Everybody still breathing?" "Unfortunately, yes," Sahix muttered. "What was that?" "Nothing! We're fine! Everything's fine!" "Good. Stay down. This next part's going to get loud." What followed could only be described as excessive. Liam produced more equipment from the supply crates, including what appeared to be a portable mortar system that was definitely not standard medical gear. He set up a defensive perimeter using a combination of mines, automated turrets, and what looked suspiciously like claymores. At every few minutes, he would drop back to check on them, offer food and water, adjusted their bandages, made sure they were recovering properly. Then he would return to the ongoing battle, and the sound of explosions and energy weapons would resume. "I've lost all feeling in my tail," Fulin said at one point. "That's probably the painkillers he gave you," Zanib replied. "I didn't see him give me painkillers." "Exactly." Sahix found himself laughing, a slightly manic sound that probably indicated he was going into shock despite the medical treatment. "We're going to score nothing on this exercise. Absolutely nothing." "Less than nothing," Fulin agreed. We've been sitting in this hole for an hour while the human medic fights an entire army by himself." They watched as Liam dealt with another wave of enemies, this time using a combination of flanking maneuvers and sustained fire that was definitely more tactical than a medic should have been capable of. He moved like a soldier, fought like a soldier, thought like a soldier. He just happened to also be obsessively concerned with keeping them alive. "You know what's really terrifying?" Foulin said after a long moment of silence. "What?" "He's not even breathing hard. Look at him. He's been fighting for an hour, carrying wounded, treating injuries, and he's not even winded." They all looked. Foulin was right. The human was still moving with the same easy confidence he had shown at the start of the exercise, as if all of this was just a normal day at work. "Humans," Sahik said quietly. "Even the medics are insane." The simulation ran for another 5 hours. 5 hours of Liam Strong, combat medic, holding their position against wave after wave of enemy forces. 5 hours of him checking on them every few minutes, making sure they were recovering, adjusting their treatment as needed. 5 hours of the three of them sitting in a foxhole, watching their scores remain resolutely stagnant while the human racked up what had to be an impressive number of eliminations. At one point, Zanib felt like he had healed enough that he could technically fly again, and he tried to take off to provide aerial support. Liam had physically pulled him back down. "You're still recovering. Stay here where I can monitor you." "But I can help." "You can help by not dying and making my job harder. Stay down." Zanib had stayed down. When the simulation finally ended, the battlefield dissolving around them, they were all still alive. Wounded, exhausted, covered in mud and blood and the remnants of Liam's medical treatments, but alive. Reality reasserted itself slowly, the neural interface releasing its hold on Sahik's consciousness in stages. He became aware of the chamber around him, the helmet lifting away, the familiar feeling of his actual body that wasn't injured or dying. He was alone in the chamber, the door already open, inviting him to exit and return to the testing facility's main room. Sahik took a moment to orient himself, taking deep breaths, letting his mind fully separate from the simulation. Then he checked the scores. The results were displayed on the chamber's screen, a complete breakdown of their performance. Sahik stared at the numbers for a long moment, then started laughing. Liam Strong, 847,942 points. The human had received massive bonuses for keeping all three teammates alive throughout the entire simulation. Additional bonuses for eliminations, for tactical thinking, for improvisation, for creative use of equipment, for defensive excellence. His medical performance alone would have given him a respectable score, but combined with his combat effectiveness, it was the highest simulation score Sahik had ever seen. Sahik himself, 743 points, mostly for survival, with a tiny amount for the few shots he had managed to get off before being wounded. Foulin, 621 points. Similar story. Zanib, 2,892 points. The Anvian had at least managed some reconnaissance before being shot down. Sahik laughed harder, leaning back in the chamber's seat, his body shaking with mirth. They had been so worried about having a human on their team, and now he wondered if the way they had treated the human before had anything to do with how he had almost maliciously kept them alive. Human medics were definitely more terrifying than human soldiers. Because human soldiers would fight you, but human medics would fight death itself to keep you alive.